Hi guys, Sean Griffin with Kingdom in Context. I want to tell you just real quick, we're going to be doing 6-week courses that we've made available for you, the viewer. If you're interested to know more about the gospel of the kingdom as taught by Yeshua, not only throughout the gospels, but all throughout the prophets, throughout the American Canon of 66, and even including the apocryphal books, I've put together a 6-week course that ties together all that information. We did this course a few months ago. We had a great turnout, great participation. People really seemed to get a lot out of it. Here's a couple of testimonies from that course.
I never really thought too much about how the creation model really played a huge role in understanding the gospel like that. And so that was a key factor. And then understanding it from that perspective, it helps to understand the Father's love and our inheritance, and how that accumulates into the harvest. It's beautiful. I mean, and the way you put it together is just, you did a great job.
You know, I started off watching your Honor of Kings videos, and they were awesome, man. Looking at Enoch and all these other videos and all these other books, and that's kind of what I've been interested in, really. And I feel like I had learned a lot from you just from watching those videos, watching your your kingdom portions, the morning cups of context. I felt like I had seen about 50 of your videos already, but so I was kind of hesitant. I felt like, well, I think I pretty much know what he's teaching here. There's not really much else to it, but I knew there was. So when I signed up for it, the class, I really just wanted to build a better foundation, build a really strong foundation. I was really surprised and shocked at how much depth and how much more I had to go when we got into the class, that it was just so much, there's so much depth to it, so much more to the gospel of the kingdom. Not that it's complicated, that it's complex. It's just that there's just a lot of little parts and pieces that have to be set on good, solid foundation. For me, it helps to know, see the big picture first. I need to see the 30,000 foot view, and then start to zoom in on some of the details. And when you can kind of capture that with some of these concepts that you put forth, like the prodigal son parable and some of these other parables that Yeshua taught, it really does help paint a picture of what the gospel of the kingdom is. And you start to really see a more clear picture of what is the Bible is teaching. Because, in the Hebrew roots, there's a little bit of a slant here. Christianity has a little bit of its own take to it. Judaism has its own take to it. But what did Yeshua say about it all? And so that's what I think you were able to bring home for me, was just focusing on what was important and what was truly being talked about.
If you want to learn how the creation model is important in the gospel of the kingdom, if you want to learn how much the Father loves us, if you want to know the path to our inheritance and how all the harvest of the souls work, this class is for you.
The other course that we're offering is over the Book of Enoch. So 6 weeks, intensive study, breakdown, dissect the Book of Enoch. We'll find all the parallels that are already built into the American Canon of 66 that lines up with the message that's within Enoch. We felt that Enoch was an important book to offer as part of one of these courses because the claim of the Book of Enoch itself is that it was written for a distant and remote generation, also for a generation that's keeping the law in the last days. And I don't know what other generation that could be speaking of other than ours. It's a very pertinent book for us to understand, weed through some of the deception that's already going down in our society, our culture around the world, and then also give us the hope of what to expect, how the Father's going to respond. So that's laid out through the Book of Enoch, and there are a lot of parallels with that message in the American Canon of 66, and I'm going to show that so I can help you understand just exactly where all those synonymous parallels are and how they fit together according to the theological themes. So we're excited to offer those two. We think they'll be super beneficial. The message of the Messiah, and then the prophecies for these end times as far as these last days. And these are two important messages that we feel we would want our audience to be very well versed in, so that you guys can share the beautiful story and beautiful message of hope to all those around you, your friends and family. The information for the courses is in the links below in the video description. You can also go to our Facebook page, Kingdom in Context, where we're going to post the information there for how you can sign up for the course. And yeah, you get each course, there's a video conference every week. So you get to actually talk with me in video conference and ask questions about the course material. We can also, many people just ask questions of all kinds, but we try to keep it focused on the course material as much as possible, as much as that was relatable. But I do also answer general questions and answers during that time as well. So it was a really fun, interactive time of fellowship, just digging in and dissecting the Word. And we had a great time. So we're going to offer it again, and you guys are welcome to go check those out. The classes are going to begin December 15th, and it's first come, first serve. I only have so many spots I can facilitate for the way the courses go, as far as holding how many per class. So go check it out, inquire. I'll get you all the information. Either message me through at kingdomincontext@gmail.com or also through our Facebook Messenger page. Many of you are friends with me on Facebook. You can just message me privately if you like as well. But either way, let me know, and I'll send you all the information about the course, and we'll see if we can get you in as soon as possible. Welcome to Kingdom in Context. The Creator never intended for us to be confused by His words. He gave us His words of life, and He gave them in context, to be understood and beneficial to our walk with Him. This channel's goal is to bring clarity to some of the misconceptions that have formed over time among believers and taught by others, however innocent and well-intended. The Scriptures make complete sense when we keep them in context of His coming kingdom and His coming King, Jesus the Messiah. If you're blessed by what we're doing with this channel and feel led to support us, visit the video description below where we have a PayPal option, a monthly Patreon option, or a traditional P.O. Box address. Thank you, and remember, context creates comprehension. And we're back. Welcome to Honor of Kings here on Kingdom in Context. I'm Sean Griffin, and I'm accompanied by my incredible co-host from the north,
Ken Heidebrecht. Hey, brothers. How you guys doing?
Doing great. Ken, it's good to see you again this week. Thanks for joining me. And this week, we're also accompanied again by our good friend from Georgia. His name is Matthew Janzen. He is the leader and pastor of a fellowship called Ministers of the New Covenant, and with his congregation out in Georgia. How you doing, Matthew? Good to see you again.
Doing great, my brothers. Excited about this, the rest of this Testament of Levi. How far we get, I don't know, but I'm excited about it. Appreciate y'all for having me on again.
Yeah, and as we saw from the last few episodes, this Testament of Levi is power-packed with scriptural canon parallels, and it's basically truly fun. And in my opinion, this is one of the honor of kings to be able to test this with you brothers. Go line by line, look at these things, how they line up with the canon, or if they don't, which is essentially, what we're focusing on with the premise of Honor of Kings. Isn't that right, Ken?
Yeah, that's right. Here at Honor of Kings, for those of you brothers and sisters who may not be familiar with kind of what our mantra is here, is that we like to take the books that have been removed over several centuries and test them, study them, see why they were removed, and if we can make decisions as to whether they can go back in based off of context and things like that. So we line them up, as Sean said, to the scriptures, to the authority, what we would call our canon, the Protestant canon of the 66 books, and just see, what they're all about. And so far along this journey, Sean and I have both discovered that there's a lot of books that are amazing that probably should have been left in. And so that's kind of the heart of this show, is seeing these books and just bringing back the old ancient writings and addressing the truths that are in them. So I love it.
Yeah, one of the things that we find out that we kind of came to such a strong realization just by organizing this show behind the scenes was that there is no actual scriptural command for a certain specific number of books to be called a Bible. So this is just something culturally over time that was put together as a collection of scriptures, which essentially just mean the word writings, and we understand that for most people. Most people understand that, but in case you've never heard that concept, and there's, of course, within that, over time, especially, we had these different councils through men who were allegiant to the Catholic Church. They formed what they called a canon, which was essentially a collection of scriptures that they deemed were truly the inspired words of God. Yet there were other branches of believers around the world at that time that had different collections of books, or they had the same core collection, but they added others into it because they also believed that they were canon as well. They were divine scriptures as well. For example, we already did our shows on the Book of Jubilees, where the Eastern Orthodox Church has considered that canon and truly divine inspired word of God for over 2,000 years, and they've had that. They believe it truly was the writings of Moses. So we have a whereas the Catholic Church didn't include that in their initial Bibles, and I think that's it's interesting because when we dug into it, we saw a ton of parallels.
Yeah. Sean, I think where a lot of confusion lies is where we would see in Deuteronomy where Moses is instructing people not to add or take away from essentially the Torah, right? So
Right.
that gets kind of cherry picked out of context to mean the brevity of books. You don't add to what we would consider the canon, right? And same with Revelation, where they would take that out of context and say, look, anyone who adds or takes away, they're going to have all these plagues kind of attached to them, right? When it's really just the prophecies in the book that it's talking about. So
yeah, in the book of Revelation specifically.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
So don't fear.
So in Deuteronomy 4, where it's talking about adding to or taking away, I understand. I just want to make sure. My understanding of that is specifically talking about like the law of Yahweh, like the Torah. So is that how you guys understand it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's not, Moses wasn't talking about the writings of Jeremiah or Nahum or any of that stuff at that time. He was just talking about what he was actually talking to them about and instructing them from what they'd received at Sinai, and also what they were collaborating, as in the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy, during their time in the wilderness. So this is the instructions they were being given, which is why I love Deuteronomy 8 verse 2, which kind of summarizes this whole purpose of them being in the wilderness, so the Father could humble them and see if they would actually keep his commandments, if it was in their hearts to keep his commandments. So this is kind of but of course they're not mentioning furthering prophets, which is why we have the Deuteronomy 18 test of, if a prophet comes along later claiming to be, a prophet like unto Moses, claiming to be hearing from God and having angelic visitation interaction, having messages from heaven above given to mankind, here's how you test it, or if there's a dreamer of dreams, Deuteronomy 13, here's how you test it. So these essential ideas, and those are the baseline tests that we actually try to hold these apocryphal and extra biblical books to as well when we do this line by line breakdown in Honor of Kings, is do they pass the Deuteronomy 13 test? Because many of these people will have a vision and it's likened to as a dream, and then they come away with a message from angels or from God. Well, how do you know if it's true or not? How do you know if it's legit? And so this is why a test was given to us, that we can a litmus test by the Father, so we can discern what's what. And thankfully, over time, we're at a unique place in history where we have all these to reflect back on retroactively, and then line them all up and see, oh my gosh, many of these major prophets, in fact, all of them, I think, at least in the American Canon 66, they're all talking about the same core events and ideas. And so it's wonderful to see the continuity of themes all throughout them.
Brother Matthew, do you want to maybe start with chapter 4 there and read that for us, the entirety of chapter 4?
Be glad to, brother. All right, begin in verse 1. It says, "Now therefore know that the Lord shall execute judgment upon the sons of men, because when the rocks are being rent, and the sun quenched, and the waters dried up, and the fire cowering, and all creation troubled, and the invisible spirits melting away, and Hades taketh spoils through the visitations of the Most High, men will be unbelieving and persist in their iniquity. On this account with punishment shall they be judged. Therefore the Most High hath heard thy prayer, to separate thee from iniquity, and that thou shouldest become to him a son, and a servant, and a minister of his presence. The light of knowledge shalt thou light up in Jacob, and as the sun shalt thou be to all the seed of Israel. And there shall be given to thee a blessing, and to all thy seed, until the Lord shall visit all the Gentiles in his tender mercies forever. And therefore there have been given to thee counsel and understanding, that thou mightest instruct thy sons concerning this, because they that bless him shall be blessed, and they that curse him shall perish.
Amen. Thanks, brother. And just for a little bit of a recap from our previous episode, what the prayer being referenced in chapter 4 here is found back in chapter 2, where Levi's among the flocks of his father, and he's tending them, and he's noticing the lawlessness all around him of men, and he starts praying to the Father about how he wants to be saved, essentially, from the midst of the lawlessness and the unrighteousness in the earth. And so then he gets this vision and gets taken up and stuff, and here we are in chapter 4. So just a little bit of back history there going forward.
Yeah, I love how this chapter starts out, just immediately going into what I would suggest is the day of the Lord.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, this is where he talks about executing judgment on the sons of men, the rocks being rent, which is torn or broken, and the sun quenched, and the waters dried up, and fire cowering. Yeah. All creation troubled, invisible spirits melting away. So if I could just real quick, there's a couple things I want to take just a piece at a time here. The rocks being rent, this to me seems to be the concept that Isaiah talks about in Isaiah 40, and also John in Matthew 3 talks about, where the hills are made low and the valleys are raised up. And this is that great earthquake that we've referenced so many times, the day of the Lord earthquake that Revelation 16:18 and Isaiah 30 verse 25 talks about, where all the seems to be like all the mountains are shaking into their valleys and they're being broken, Yeah,
100%. I mean, it's all over the place. As you said, the continuity of these prophets talking about the same events. And this is one of the biggest events that they tend to talk about consistently. Yeah. We see it in Nahum chapter 1, verse 5, as well as Haggai chapter 2, verse 6, Isaiah 13:13. I mean, it's everywhere. Sean, it's amazing. Yeah.
And as a general overarching description, Zephaniah 1, verses 14 through 15 references this idea. It says, "Near is the great day of the Lord, near and coming quickly, very quickly. Listen, the day of the Lord, in it the warrior cries out bitterly. A day of wrath is that day, a day of trouble and distress, a day of destruction and desolation, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness." And this to me, I mean, unless I'm off, guys, this to me seems to be referenced in Testament of Levi 4:1.
Yeah, I see that summary there, John. Absolutely. I mean, the sun being quenched. What was that? Joel 2:31, Matthew 24:29.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I know the terminology about the sun being quenched. People think that the sun's actually going to turn off, or someone's going to pour water on it and douse it out. Yeah. Do you guys think that that's what it's referring to, or is it just talking about it being diminished because the creation's being affected as return? What do you think it means by being quenched?
For me, it could go a couple ways. I know in Revelation it talks about how there's an angel in the sun, apparently. I don't know what that means, to be honest. There could be an actual spirit being angel that resides within the core of the sun that's moving around. I don't know. I've theorized that. Somehow he lessens the amount of light that would radiate from the sun. That's a possibility. It could also be the latter part of what you just said, Sean, about how the creation model is being so greatly affected on that day that it gets kind of just dimmed out through all the chaos.
There is a passage in Isaiah 30, verse 26. It's actually, I'll read 25 as well because it kind of connects to what we just talked about, the earthquake. But I don't know if it has to do with this. And to me, if we understand the creation model, like we've discussed, and so all the Book of Enoch, right, and so many other episodes we've already done, it would be interesting if the sun and moon were somehow initially perpetuated through an electrical universe, but just like at an electrical power plant, you still need someone stationed at these specific places to make sure things function right. Kind of like, you just referenced, is it perhaps an angel in the sun? That there's something about it. He has a literal position to make sure that thing functions properly as a created concept within the creation model. So the reason I say that is just keep that in mind as I read these two verses. Verse 25 of Isaiah 30, it says, "On every lofty mountain and on every high hill there will be streams running with water on the day of the great slaughter when the towers fall. And the light of the moon will be as the light of the sun, And the light of the sun will be 7 times brighter, like the light of 7 days. On the day the Lord binds up the fracture of his people and heals the bruise he has inflicted. So
Yeah.
it just makes me think, like, is this talking about the sun and moon become brighter after the day of the Lord, or is this kind of like when a light bulb is about to go out, it surges in luminosity and then dims?
Yeah, I've heard you talk about what you just mentioned there. It could very well be, man. Just like a
It's
power
wild.
surge. Yeah.
Yeah, because he's, like it says, Matthew 24:29, the powers of the heaven are shaken as return. Isaiah 34:4, Isaiah 64:1, Revelation 6:14, the firmaments roll back like a scroll at his return. He's coming down with the angels. So it makes me wonder, is it truly what, like it says in this passage in Testament of Levi, verse 1, where it says the creation is troubled? Is that what it's talking about? Like all the powers of the heaven, the firmament are being shaken, and everything is just kind of messing up, so to speak, for a quick moment, for that day.
Yeah, I would say, and I think we've talked about this. I can't remember which episode it was, but my research leads me to believe that there's at least 7 firmaments. And so if we're taking this biblical creation model seriously and literally, if Yahweh is descending, with Yeshua at his right hand and all the angels who apparently surround and kind of circumvent his throne where he is on the 7th firmament, they've got to go through 7 layers to get to us, essentially. So that would, in my opinion, equate to all creation being troubled, like literally all of everything created, the heavens and the earth, everything being created or troubled on that day. So yeah. Did you know that the biblical beasts known as Leviathan and Behemoth have an end of days appearance? It's true. Learn all about it in this brief video teaching at the YouTube channel Hanging on His Words.
It's wild. Now the water's being dried up. This could be a couple different references as far as just because of the great earthquake and the reformation of the land that we see from all these prophetic books in the canon. This is the tongue of Egypt in Isaiah. I think it's Isaiah 27. The tongue of Egypt is dried up. Also, we know the Euphrates River is dried up, so the kings in the east can travel over to the Valley of Armageddon to try to fight Yeshua at his return. And so I'm just wondering if that's the reference there or not.
Well, it makes me think about Revelation 16:5, where it says, "Then I heard the angel in charge of the waters say, 'You are just in these judgments, O Holy One, you who are and who were.'" And so this is what near and dear to both of us, Sean, and I assume you, Brother Matthew, just with regards to how Yahweh describes all of creation and everything that he tasked to his angels to be ministers over and to watch over and to just, these various positions that they have. And one of them apparently is in charge of waters. And we know that there's some angels that are in charge of winds that, have to stop the winds right before the day of the Lord. And so they're in charge of a lot of things. And so it could be that the drying up is a mixture of the wrath, the bowls getting poured out into this, the waters, and somehow that, getting all stagnant and drying up essentially. It could be a mixture of those things, in my opinion.
What do you think, Matthew?
Yeah, I mean, I go along with everything you guys are saying. I think that there's some texts. It reminds me, like when it says the sun being quenched and the waters dried up. I think that there's some text in Scripture that these things are absolutely physical and literal. I was thinking about, when Yeshua died, or when he was dying on the cross, and I think it was dark. And for some reason, I can't remember. I want to say maybe at the space of 2 or 3 hours, it says in the Gospel, somewhere right in there. And so I think that was a physical or literal quenching of the sun. And so I can see that. I think that there's some cases where that's what the Scriptures are speaking of. And I think that there's also metaphors in the Old Testament where, like when the sun and the moon are dark, it's referring to earthly authorities. in higher regard, how that they fall. I think spoken about like in Isaiah 14, I believe, where it talks about the King Nebuchadnezzar, or the king of Babylon. How art thou fallen from heaven? I think there's I think it's twofold there. I think it's talking about Satan, but I believe it's also talking about King Nebuchadnezzar, how that he falls from a position of authority. And I think it's interesting here that in chapter 4, if you continue to read, after it talks about the judgment, it says, therefore, in verse 2, the Most High hath heard thy prayer to separate thee from iniquity. Thou shouldest become to him a son, S-O-N, and a servant and minister of his presence. Then verse 3, the light of knowledge shalt thou light up in Jacob, and as the sun shalt thou be to all the seed of Israel. So it looks like there's a contrast, how that the sun, when the sun is quenched and all of these judgments happen, it's because of sins and iniquity. And then Levi here, he's a minister of righteousness. He's been separated from iniquity, and he gives light and sunshine, to the people, meaning the law of Yahweh, the commandments. And so, I think there's a natural here and there's a spiritual here. I go along with everything you guys have said, and all those cross references. Sometimes, let me just say this, and I don't know if this will make it to the show or not, but a lot of times, at least in my walk, I found that Messianic and Hebrew roots people tend to have some kind of like a taboo of the mentioning of the sun, the S-U-N, and I've heard so many people say, people worship on Sunday or worshiping the sun, and I don't necessarily agree with that, but there's many scriptures in the Tanakh that speak positively of the sun. I think it's in Psalm 84 where it says Yahweh is a sun and a shield, and of course the popular one is in Malachi 4 where it says the Son of Righteousness, S-U-N, Shemesh in Hebrew, Son of Righteousness will arise with healing in his wings. I think we agree that's talking about Yeshua of Nazareth. And so I bring that up because somebody might read this in the Testament of Levi and they might say, well, that kind of sounds pagan, you'll be like the sun. But yet we have scriptures in the Tanakh that talk about Yahweh is the sun and Yeshua is the sun, S-U-N. It's because the sun gives us light and warmth, and we need it for the garden, and so I just thought I'd throw that in there. That stuck out at me when we were talking about it.
Yeah, you're right, Matthew. We also have saints being analogous to the stars as well. So
absolutely,
like
brother.
So it's just a reference of the creation itself and what function it may hold, and bringing forth that analogy to the new nature that we receive at the resurrection. And I like what you're saying because I actually see that type of contrasting idea brought forth in the book of Joel, the prophet Joel, in the Canon, chapter 3. And if you guys will allow me real quick, I'll just read 3 or 4 verses kind of about what you just read from the testament of Levi, Matthew. In verse 11 of Joel 3, it says, hasten and come, all you surrounding nations, and gather yourselves there. Bring down, Yahweh, your mighty ones. Let the nations be aroused and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there I will sit to judge all the surrounding nations. Put in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, tread, for the winepress is full. The vats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Now, this, of course, is him destroying the armies that come against him, and it's making the metaphor of a winepress, right? Which is what we see in Matthew 13 when the angels are sent out because to tread the winepress, to tread the grapes, so to speak, because they're ripe. Speaking about the bad guys are ready to try to fight him. And then in verse 14 it says, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. The sun and moon grow dark, and the stars lose their brightness. The Lord roars from Zion and utters his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth. Now we remember the definition of the word heavens is the word firmament. And this is a concept that Ken and I were just explaining here. The heavens would mean the multiple layers of firmament, and the earth tremble. But Yahweh is a refuge for his people and a stronghold to the sons of Israel. Then you will know that I am Yahweh, your Elohim, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain. So Jerusalem will be holy, and strangers will pass through it no more. So here's an idea of contrasting the bad guys, who are analogous to grapes being tread in the winepress, to then Yahweh being a refuge for his people and a stronghold to the sons of Israel, and what he's going to do for those who are resurrected in that day, who will have the victory and who will overcome in the grand scheme. So this is yeah.
It's amazing, and the wine is going to be up to the horse's bridle apparently. Yeah, it's going to be bloody.
Praise Yahweh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you, Brother Matthew, and you, Sean, obviously. I see it as twofold. You can have the figurative, and then, the sun, Yeshua being referenced as a sun. I think he's super bright. I mean, Paul saw firsthand how bright he really was, right? So there's a twofold thing for sure there. I agree.
Yeah, it's so interesting here. If I'm reading it right, this is saying that Levi will be a light of knowledge, and he'll be a son to the seed of Israel. And of course, we know, the Levites, people think that the Levites, all they did was, animal sacrifices, but they were the teachers of the law. Yeah. They were assigned to teach the Torah in all the territories of Israel. And man, that is being a light to the rest of the tribes. I think that's beautiful there in chapter 4. I love that.
Yes, that was definitely part of their commission. And this is why we see, they're brought back in, there's the Levitical priesthood, if I could put it like that, is actually reinstated, as we see in Isaiah 66 verses 8 and 9, after the Lord returns, because all those resurrected saints that are inhabiting the interior of the New Jerusalem are part of the Melchizedek priesthood under Yeshua, which is called the kingdom of heaven. But outside in the earth plane, they still need a priesthood to give the law, which is light, to mankind. Which is why Isaiah 2:2-4 talks about the law going forth from Zion. And so naturally, according to God's pattern and instruction, he's going to need that priesthood, which, is why statements like I think Jeremiah 33:22 talks about, Levi will be a priest before him perpetually. Like that covenant that was made with Levi, it's not going away, And so this is
Amen.
It's kind of a big deal. But yeah, I agree with you. It's Levi, because this is the testament of Levi. And so this is Levi specifically getting a promise that his descendants will be light to mankind. So I guess what I'm trying to get to here is this suggesting that there will be some of his descendants of Levi that don't actually get resurrected, but are still survivors of the mortal men after the day of the Lord, who are then reinstated by Yahweh and his son in their authority to be the priesthood over mankind outside the New Jerusalem.
That's how I understand it, Sean. And I actually think we're going to find a lot of Levi's literal descendants in kind of the mid-eastern side of Africa on the day of the Lord, in my opinion, based off of the Septuagint version of Psalm, where it talks about the Ethiopian nations are going to be eating Leviathan, and they're going to be made Levites again. So I guess the implication with that would be that these Levites who are literal descendants aren't believers, otherwise they would have taken on the resurrection, but they're going to be spared because we know that Yeshua is going to spare certain nations so that they're going to be survivors of the day of the Lord to repopulate the earth. And they're going to, reinstate Levi's priesthood again.
What was that text? What was that Septuagint text in Psalms, Kent?
Let me just pick that up real quick. I don't have it on hand here, Matthew.
Yeah, Ken, I love how you just blew right by the whole eating Leviathan thing, as if the viewer knows what you're talking about.
We'll pop up videos for that if they want more information, because I've done videos on it.
Yeah, well, if you guys haven't seen Ken's video on Leviathan, we had actually together done a presentation on a different channel in the past, but that's not available anymore. So Ken has his own video he made that if you guys have a chance to go see that, I highly recommend it. It's about Leviathan and how it pertains to the day of the Lord. So it's very informative and important for understanding eschatology and the millennial reign, in my opinion. So I highly recommend checking that video out.
Yeah. Psalm 73, verse 13-14 there, Brother Matthew. It says, okay. Thou didst establish the sea in thy might. Thou didst break to pieces the head of the dragon in the water. Thou didst break the pieces of the head of the dragon. Thou didst give him for meat to the Ethiopian nations. And I derived that the dragon would be the same character as the Leviathan through other contextual references.
And just for the viewer, in case if they're curious about something that we are just referencing, as we talked about the Levitical priesthood and the eternal covenant made with Levi, and we're reading out of the book of Levi from the Testimony of 12 Patriarchs. We have this in the canon as a general premise to understand. If this is the first time you're watching Honor of Kings and you haven't seen the previous episodes that we've built up to this, just as a quick brief reminder, here in Micah chapter 2, excuse me, not Micah, let me go to Malachi chapter 2, and we'll find how the Canon actually speaks about this covenant made between the father and Levi and his descendants and their purpose, which is what we were just talking about, which is the day of the Lord. And if it's verse 4 through 9 real quick, it says, "Then you will know that I have sent this commandment to you, that my covenant may continue with Levi, says the Lord of hosts. My covenant with him was one of life and peace, and I gave them to him as an object of reverence, so he would revere me and stood in awe of my name. And true instruction was in his mouth, and unrighteousness was not found on his lips. He walked with me in peace and uprightness, and he turned many back from iniquity. For the lips of a priest should preserve knowledge, and men should seek instruction from his mouth. For he is the messenger of Yahweh of hosts. But as for you, you have turned aside from the way. You have caused many to stumble by the instruction. You have corrupted the covenant of Levi, says the Lord of hosts. So I have also made you despised and abased above all the people, just as you are not keeping my ways, but show impartiality in the instruction." Now, the context of Malachi 2 is the priesthood in general in ancient Israel. The Levitical priesthood was corrupted. They were not, as he just reprimanded them, they were not doing it properly, and they were being hypocritical. And so he's reminded them, hey, guys, y'all are descendants of Levi. I made a covenant with him. Levi was faithful to me. He was zealous for me, which is what we're going to read about here in a few more chapters. It's why Levi even got the priesthood. And then you guys, his descendants, are screwing it up. Like, you're messing this thing up, man. Stop. So he's not happy with them. And so this, of course, leads to the invasions by the Assyrians and later the Babylonians, which disperses the nation as they knew it. And it was never the same after that. So it's the priesthood is a super important. These are the guys that are supposed to be, like it says in these passages, they're supposed to be the ones that preserve knowledge, and men should be able to seek instruction from their mouth because they are considered the messengers of Yahweh of hosts. So if these guys aren't doing it right, they're not keeping themselves set apart in their heart and in their behavior according to his instructions, then what are the men to look to? How can men go find, other men that they can learn from? And this is such an important deal. And to me, this is just why it was so important to have Yeshua show up, who was someone that could be set apart without fail, so that he can earn a priesthood that we will all be able to learn from in the future, right? That we all can now, through the covenant made with Yeshua, that we get to have his instruction put on our heart. And then, as I already referenced earlier in Isaiah 2, and the millennial reign, the law will go forth from Zion, which is the New Jerusalem that comes down with Yeshua inside of it. And from his essential authority and priesthood throughout all the earth, people will learn the Father's righteous living instead of learning war and corruption and deceit. And it's just a beautiful promise. And it all requires a proper priesthood intact. So,
yeah, Sean, it's so easy to breeze on by that chapter in Malachi, those passages that you just read, and not pick up the fact that, Yahweh's speaking directly to Levi himself, saying that he gave him the priesthood. And I've seen that, and I probably myself have just kind of narrowed that down into a understanding of, well, it must just be somehow through Aaron, right? It's just kind of a nice poetic way of referring to Aaron because, wasn't Aaron the first priest? But when you had that debate with the rabbi on your channel there, and you pulled that in context, I was like, whoa, why haven't I ever seen that the way that Sean's talking about it? So it's definitely interesting, brother, and it lines up perfectly with this testament of Levi here, him being given the priesthood.
Yeah, it was a beautiful blessing to Levi, and it was because he was faithful. It wasn't just because there wasn't some undue grace extended to him. It was because he was zealous and faithful for the Father's instructions.
Yeah.
So he was set apart.
Yeah. So Sean and Matthew, before we move on, I just wanted to bring something up in the latter portion of verse 1 of chapter 4, where it says, "And Hades takes spoils through the visitations of the Most High." I think, Sean, this book was found in Greek at the Dead Sea Scrolls. I don't recall. I don't have that information up at hand here, but that would be why the word Hades would be used.
Yeah.
Because we know that the counterpart to that is, or I should say the synonym for that is Sheol, right?
That's right.
And so we know that
Hebrew word is Sheol.
That's right. And contextually, Sheol/Hades receives the souls of men. So when Yahweh is visiting men in this chapter here, he's doing it with the day of the Lord, right? He's as we were talking about earlier, he's stomping them down like a wine press and a lot of people are dying. So their souls are going into Hades, Sheol, and it's just another kind of poetic way of saying that, the spoils of those souls is what Hades is taking in. So just for some clarification for our audience.
Yeah, and this is even if you're unfamiliar with this idea. I mean, last season, I think it was episode 7, we did an entire breakdown of Sheol, Tartarus, and the Prison of Stars. We're going to go check out that episode as we were going through the Book of Enoch, and even in the generic lexicons and the concordances, it will directly tell you, if you look up the word Hades, it's Sheol in the Hebrew, and it's considered the realm of the dead, the underworld. It's not just the grave. It's not just an idiomatic term for the grave, the dirt that you lie in. And it's an actual place where the soul goes to reside, to wait for either judgment in the lake of fire or to be raised into eternal life on the day of the Lord. So it's an actual, and it was designed at creation for this very purpose. And so this is why it's referenced all throughout the canon. And Yeshua even uses this in context, the whole concept of Sheol and Hades in a parable in Luke 16. For his parable, and because that was what they all understood as where you go when you die, waiting for either resurrection or further judgment. Which is why Jesus can say, we're not worried about the first death, right? We're not worried about those who can just kill the body and not the soul. We're worried about Yahweh, who can kill the body and the soul in the lake of fire. That's in Matthew 10:28. So your soul's not killed when it goes down into Sheol.
That's right.
Your body's been killed, but your soul's not killed, and that goes there to wait one of two destinations, depending upon how you're judged by the Son.
And that's why the Messiah is so amazing, is that he triumphed over that second death, right? And that he can offer us that same triumph at the resurrection. So it's amazing. Yeah,
and this is where just there's a general Catholic and Calvinistic idea that has arisen over time, where it claims that, and this is a common evangelic statement that's made to get people to realize their need for salvation and their need for belief and faith in Yeshua, is they'll say, well, Yeshua experienced what you deserved. And you're like, okay, well, wait a minute. Okay, yeah, I get it that he was crucified on the cross, but Scripture says he did that out of obedience. And so, because if we try to take that statement, or people say, well, he took the punishment that you deserved, and yes, our peace was upon him, by his stripes we were healed. The chastisement of our iniquity was upon him. We get that idea from Isaiah 53. But I feel like sometimes people don't take that extra step to actually parcel out the metaphoric use of language about that event compared to the literal application of scriptural ideas to the death of Yeshua himself. Because a baby that's aborted 8 months in the womb, did they deserve what Yeshua received on the cross?
No.
I'm asking a hyperbolic question. No. And instead of saying a 3-year-old who disobeys his mother and has already started engaging in lying, you know what I'm saying? So this general premise of that, just saying, well, everything that's given life in the human realm deserves the punishment Yeshua received on the cross, and therefore he took our punishment for us. That works well when you preach, and that definitely gets people's attention. But when you put that into literal mechanical application of scriptures, I struggle to see how that actually lines up with theology, because again, Yeshua didn't also receive the second death.
That's right.
That's what we're saved from. And to me, it kind of blows my mind, the lack of connecting the dots by a lot of famous, preaching, is this idea that, wait a minute, what actually did happen to Yeshua? His soul went somewhere, then he was resurrected back into a physical living body that he now has eternal life in. And we're promised the same thing. So we escaped the second death, and that's what Yeshua explains. And this is why Revelation 20 talks about the great wrath and judgment, where the second death happens. And this is something that I think that just kind of mixing these ideas from very vibrant and boisterous preaching over time has really confused a lot of people, because it plays into this Catholic ideology of glorifying the death of Christ as opposed to explaining it from Scripture, according to not only the law itself, but the application of his obedience leading unto his priesthood. And so it just something I just thought I'd bring up real quick.
Yeah, there's so many dots not being connected, brother. But Yah willing, And with, the guaranteed deposit in us, we can make those connections in these latter days. And we do it by adhering to context and certain, ways of reading and understanding the scriptures, right? So, and with these extra biblical books, in my opinion, which a lot of people didn't have in days of old, and some of them did, but yeah, it's very, very fascinating.
And then this particular book, I don't think we mentioned this again at the beginning of this episode, but this particular book was found amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls. So just in case the viewer is wondering, verse 4 of 4:4 says, "And there shall be given to them a blessing to all your seed, and the Lord shall visit the Gentiles in his tender mercies forever." To me, this is the coming down of the New Jerusalem and Yeshua being inside the king and that kingdom that comes down, to which we see, the Isaiah 47 or Ezekiel 47 and Revelation 22. We've got the water of life is extended to all the survivors outside the city, as well as the leaves that grow on the trees that grow next to the river of life are used for medicine for the nations outside the city. And so therefore you've got his tender mercies being extended to the water. The river of life goes out of the city to replenish the land, as Isaiah 47 talks about, and the leaves are used for healing. So there's, in my opinion, there'll be a lot of healing needed after his return from all the, the GMOs and all the things that are put into our chemicals and all the carnage that happens leading up to the day of the Lord. And who knows what that's going to look like for those who actually survive. So,
yeah, I agree. Absolutely. The word being used there is Gentiles, but it's the nations, right? When he comes to visit all the nations. Yeah,
that's right. And therefore they've been given to you counsel and understanding. So yeah, I just think it's a beautiful promise, and people don't realize just how merciful the Father will exemplify himself through his Son when the New Jerusalem arrives. So it's a beautiful message of the gospel of the kingdom being preached right here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a New Testament concept only. Absolutely.
Yeah. Ken, do you want to start in chapter 5, or do we have anything else in chapter 4 to talk over?
I mean, we could continue in 4, but I think just for time's sake and because Matthew's here only a short while with us, we'll move on. Yeah, I'll start in chapter 5, verse 1. "And thereupon the angel opened to me the gates of heaven, and I saw the holy temple, and upon a throne of glory the Most High. And he said to me, Levi, I have given thee the blessings of the priesthood until I come and sojourn in the midst of Israel. Then the angel brought me down to the earth and gave me a shield and a sword and said to me, Execute vengeance on Shechem because of Dinah, your sister. And I will be with you because the Lord has sent me. And I destroyed at that time the sons of Hamor, as it is written in the heavenly tablets. And I said to him, I pray you, O Lord, tell me your name, that I may call upon you in a day of tribulation. And he said, I am the angel who intercedes for the nation of Israel, that they may not be smitten utterly, for every evil spirit attacks it. And after these things I awaked, and blessed the Most High, and the angel who intercedes for the nation of Israel, and for all the righteous. I love that chapter, Sean.
Yeah, this is awesome. Right off the bat, I think verse 1 does not seem to parallel Isaiah 6, the vision of heaven,
the
temple.
Yeah, same with Revelation.
Seeing him sitting on the throne.
Yeah, Daniel.
Yeah. And of course, Isaiah talks about his train filling the temple in verse 1, which we don't really get that specific description, but it's still, there's a temple in heaven and the Lord is sitting upon it. So sitting upon the throne there. Yeah. Now, of course, do we all agree that the idea that the temple and the throne he's sitting upon is the actual mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant in heaven?
That's how I understand it. Yeah.
Likewise.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Which is why they don't worry about the copy that was made on earth anymore, it seems like, right? Because there was already an original in heaven the whole time.
Yes.
Okay. So I just thought I'd throw that out there because we did discuss that last season. I think it was episode 14 where we talked about the second Baruch, the first 6 chapters of second Baruch. I think that video was titled Babylonian Raiders or something like that.
Babylonian Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So
because in that episode we get to see that the earth actually claims the ark and some of the other temple items, and it's because the angel commands the earth to open up its mouth, just like it did in the, was it Book of Numbers?
Yeah.
So very interesting.
So
Yeah.
right here, it says, then the angel, this is verse 3, then the angel brought me down to the earth and gave me a shield and a sword and said to me, execute vengeance on Shechem because of Dinah, thy sister. So, automatically you go back to the story there in the book of Genesis. So Levi is saying that the angel told him to do what he did. I don't think I'm as learned. I know I'm not as learned on these extra biblical books as you guys, but so obviously when we read in the text of Genesis, Jacob is upset, right? Because of what Levi and his brother did there. So how do we did Jacob did he not know about the angelic visitation, or was he just upset because of the bloodshed, or how do y'all understand that?
Sean, you go ahead, brother. I'll add to whatever you don't.
Yeah, well, I'm actually looking up the verse now, and because this is actually, what was it, Jubilees 33, where we get this mention here. Well, we went over this in our episodes on Jubilees 33, where he talks about this as well, and how the angel would come to him and told him to do this because he wanted to do this, and basically the angel is giving him the go ahead because it was in fulfillment of actual Torah commands, and Jacob didn't want anything to be done, but Levi did want something to be done. And this specific moment here was actually one of the reasons why he gets the priesthood, because he was zealous for the Lord and his Torah. Because remember, this is all happening within the land, and these inhabitants of Canaan, the men of Shechem, the Canaanites, were inhabitants of the land, and for their behavior, they're being spewed out of the land, as Leviticus tells us in Leviticus 18, 19, and 20. And this was part of that behavior, and which that they were committing adultery, stealing people's wives, and killing the husbands. And just as they had kidnapped Dinah, which is a direct violation of Torah command, and the person who does that deserves death, they had also were trying to go into covenant with Jacob, which Jacob was instructed not to do previously in Genesis. And in fact, even in Genesis, I can't even remember both Jubilees and Genesis. But ultimately, the angel shows up. We have the second confirmation of this is in Jubilees, where the angel shows up to Levi and says, "Hey, yeah, you do this. It's okay, and don't tell anybody basically what's going on, because they're going to stop you." Essentially, I'm paraphrasing. I'm sorry. I'm trying to look up the specific verse here.
Yeah, I think the implication was that Jacob wanted to have good standing with the people around him. He was more interested in the politics of like not ruffling feathers type thing, as opposed to like having zealous righteousness towards the father and his instructions. Okay. The way that his son Levi apparently upheld. So it's interesting because we have this weird kind of juxtaposition between the angel giving him the sword and the shield, saying go and do this, right? You would think, okay, that's an endorsement from a heavenly being to do this. Sure. I probably have the right to do this. He goes and does it. And then later in chapter 6 of this book of Testament of Levi, we see that Jacob was grieved at it and he was wroth about it, and even refers to it as a sin. But it's not, obviously it's not a transgression of the law, because he was just told to do it by a minister of the heavenly realm, right? So it just, the context, in my opinion, is because Jacob wanted to not ruffle feathers. He wanted to, let the whole raping of Dinah thing slide and not get into any weird, like, little skirmishes in the area, right? And what's interesting is, as we're going to continue reading in this book, apparently these men at Shechem wanted to also do the same thing to Sarah and Rebecca as they did to Dinah. So they were all about raping and pillaging and doing all those things. So it was like a preeminent, let's get rid of this like nasty little clan here, and you can go ahead and do that. We'll give you a sword and shield to do that.
Yeah. So essentially, as Genesis 38 even mentions, or Genesis 34, I should say, Jacob had his reservations simply because he wanted, just peace at all costs. But that the costs that he was willing to sacrifice or to relent on was simply disobedience of justice from the Torah itself. But Levi wasn't about to let that happen. So this is an interesting moment where a son who is coming into his own sees his father making a decision that he doesn't agree with, and he feels he's backed by the instructions of Torah. And so and then of course these two books claim that there's an angelic visitation to verify his feeling of justice. And so he goes ahead and does it.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, it is.
I think that you guys explained some of this to me the last time we talked about this particular book. And I apologize if I can't remember correctly.
It's okay.
It's just interesting. I mean, it might just be a little tidbit, but it's just something that jumps off at me. And I mean, I'm reading right here in Genesis 34. Okay, so while Sean was explaining that, and this goes along with what you said, Sean. You know, it says at the end of verse 7, for Shechem had committed an outrage against Israel by sleeping with Jacob's daughter, and such a thing should not be done. So the author here of Genesis is saying, look, this is unlawful, what had just happened. So, yeah, I think I go along with what you're all saying about Jacob, just wanting to keep peace and not wanting so much turmoil to be taking place, you know, in the land.
Well, he wanted to integrate, right? He was willing to like meet the terms that Shechem and Hamor were laying out to him. And, well, you know, how can we intermarry with you guys? And more importantly, how do we get Dinah to marry my son Shechem? Because he really has a thing for her, right? And it was like, well, circumcise your sons and do all this stuff, and we can integrate. And they were cool with doing that, but obviously Simeon and Levi were like, no, we can't do this.
Yeah, so what a trick, huh?
Yeah, there's three big things that this violates, Matthew. This whole story, and that Jacob was willing to allow to be violated. The first one was kidnapping. That's a strict command in the Torah. The kidnapper deserves death. And this is what you actually have to read kind of through the story to realize, and this is why we love the account of Jubilees, because it gives you not only that Dinah was age of 12 when this happens, but that that Shechem and his father Hamor would not let them go. So they never saw Dinah again until Levi and Simeon went in and killed everybody and got her back. They literally kidnapped her and then took her virginity. So we don't even know, according to Deuteronomy 22 and other places, we don't even know if she cried out rape, because she was literally kidnapped and they weren't around her. The actual making a covenant with the people of the land, that's another big violation for a no-no. And then also giving your daughter to any of the Gentile nations, that was another big no-no in the Torah that Jacob was disobeying at this point. And so this is where there's three pretty big things there that Levi was justified in his actions.
Those were excellent points. I've only read Jubilees one time, so I need to go back and read it a second time.
Yeah, brother, it's insane. It is just full of amazing little nuggets.
But I've always read that in Genesis 34 and was like, you know, I think these sons did the right thing.
Yeah, I know, and I read that too. But we're taught that this was like rebellion against his father, which would have been a sin, right? So that this whole thing wasn't good.
Yeah, we actually this is a big point of contention from atheists, is they try to take this story and say, see, you know, one of the forefathers of the faith, Jacob, is willing just to give his daughter, and yes, he was, and that was bad, and that was a character defect on Jacob's part. But thankfully, you know, Levi came to the rescue of Dinah, and so you know,
it could be too. It could have been. I mean, this is hypothetical. I'm speculating. I think it's educated speculation, but you know how sometimes I at least remember growing up and finding out certain familial problems in the church, and some of the older people in the family wanted to keep it hush hush because of embarrassment. You know, and you think, golly, you know, this needs to be dealt with. It needs to be brought out in the open. We need to go before the elders, and they just don't want to deal with it because it brings embarrassment or shame upon the family. So something like that could have been going on here in Genesis 34 too, where Jacob was like, I just really don't want to deal with this. I know they did my daughter wrong, but this is embarrassing, and let's just kind of gloss over it. And the sons, in this case, were more righteous than the father, because, and I know the scripture says honor your father, but obviously we honor our father to the extent that the law allows us to honor our father. If Yahweh the Father, you know, he trumps the earthly father, obviously. So,
yeah, amen.
But that's a great question to bring up, because I'm sure there's a lot of viewers out there that are maybe thinking along those same lines. So it's great. And this is another wonderful example of just reminding folks that Genesis itself is not, it doesn't have all the details. I mean, I would say 99 out of 100 people who read Genesis could already tell you that Genesis is definitely summarized in certain parts of the book, clearly, because it's trying to cover such large swaths of time that it doesn't give you every single detail about every single event. And that's the beauty of having some of these extra biblical and apocryphal books that did fill in a lot of the details for Genesis, because there's a ton of them. And even other prophets like Ezra fills in details that we don't get in the creation week that Ezra fills in for us, and so just little stuff like this it helps us better understand some of the decisions that are made in stories like Shechem and Dinah and Levi.
I find verse 6 interesting, where he says, I pray thee, O Lord, tell me thy name, that I may call upon you in a day of tribulation. So Levi is asking this angel, right? I mean, the word is Lord there, Kyrios would be in the Greek, which just means master, or someone of power, or someone that's in an authoritative position. This is not referring to Yahweh. This isn't a pre-incarnate Yeshua. None of this stuff. It's in context, still talking about this angel. And he doesn't give him the name, which is interesting. We see that also earlier in, what was it, Genesis, was it like 18 or something like that? I can't remember where Jacob's wrestling and he's asking for the name, right?
Right.
They don't tend to give their names, even though I do believe that we're given a name, but it's kind of subtext layered in there. But what's interesting here is he tells him an interesting little tidbit where he says that he's the angel who intercedes for the nation of Israel and for all the righteous. And so it just makes me think back to First Enoch, where I wonder if Levi had the writings of Enoch, which I do believe he did. He would understood it's either between, in my opinion, Phanuel and Michael. And so I don't know, Sean, what your research has led you to in reference to who this angel is that's interceding for the nation of Israel. It seems like the descriptions, and like I said, First Enoch can lead you to either Phanuel or Michael. I know historically it's taught that Michael is over the nation of Israel, so that would make sense, but he's not the restrainer, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm leaning towards Michael myself because of
me too.
all the different canon references and extra biblical references.
It's interesting that in verse 7 we're told that every spirit attacks Israel, right? So anyone that keeps the commandments of God, you've got the unclean spirits of First Enoch, of Genesis 6, plaguing you. They're after the ones that keep the commandments, that are part of the Commonwealth of Israel. So we need this angel apparently to help us out with that.
So in chapter 6, verse 1, it says, when I was going to my father, I found a brazen shield. Wherefore also the name of the mountain is Apsis, which is near Gabal, to the south of Abila. And I kept these words in my heart. And after this I counseled my father and Reuben my brother to bid the sons of Hamor not to be circumcised, for I was zealous because of the abomination which they had wrought on my sister. And I slew Shechem first, and Simeon slew Hamor. And after this my brothers came and smote that city with the edge of the sword. And my father heard these things and was wroth. He was grieved in that they had received the circumcision, and after that had been put to death. And in his blessings he looked amiss upon us, for we sinned because we had done this thing against his will, and he was sick on that day. But I saw that the sentence of God was for evil upon Shechem, for they sought to do to Sarah and Rebekah as they had done to Dinah our sister. But the Lord prevented them. And they persecuted Abraham our father when he was a stranger, and they vexed his flocks when they were big with young. And Ebleon, who was born in his house, they most shamefully handled. And thus they did to all strangers, taking away their wives by force, and they banished them. But the wrath of the Lord came upon them to the uttermost.
Yeah, so there we go. We get some more context as to why this was a very, very righteous act on Levi's part.
Apparently, Sarah and Rebekah were some lookers.
Yeah. And in their old age, too,
Right. It seems to be from Genesis 12 and all these other accounts, Genesis 20, it seems to be that these ladies were attractive. But it's interesting to me when we're looking at this idea of just, you've got them, the men of Shechem being circumcised because, like we talked about a minute ago, Jacob had made that proposition to them. And even though Jacob was wrong to do that, that was what he had done. And Levi and Simeon thought, okay, well, this will just give us a great opportunity
Yeah.
When they're healing, so to speak, on the mend, we can go in while they're not at their full 100% capacity and just take them all out. Isn't there something very similar to this in the book of Judges with Samson?
Yep.
Doesn't Samson do like the same thing in Judges?
Yeah. He gets how many men to circumcise themselves, and then he kills them in their weakness. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't remember what chapter that is. I don't know if you guys remember or not, but
I can't remember. Interesting. It seems to be a common tactic if you're going to take out a good number of men, you know.
Or did Samson get his idea from this?
Very well could be. Good connection, brother.
I mean, because that was pretty slick of Samson to think of something like that, but it didn't.
And he definitely wasn't the slickest, right?
Yeah. Just makes you wonder, huh?
Yeah. Sean and Matt, in verse 1 there, I did a little bit of Googling where it says that he found the brazen shield, and wherefore also the name of the mountain is Aspis. So I just looked up Aspis, and apparently Aspis is a word in the Greek for shield. The Greeks, I guess, adopted this concept or something like that and named a shield Aspis. I don't know if it comes from this initially, because Levi found a shield near a mountain named Aspis, and then the Greeks kind of latched on to like calling it that. I have no idea. It's an interesting little parallel, though. Another thing, Sean, that I find fascinating is just to mention with the sentence starting before verse 6, where it says, "And after this my brothers came and smote that city with the edge of the sword." Yeah. So I know this is a book that we're going to test, and we're going to, hopefully get to it soon. It's a very, very large one, but the only account that I've seen any of that in is in the book of Jasher, where they have these crazy battles up against this city, and it includes all the brothers.
Yes. Yeah, I thought the same thing, Ken, that this little end of the sentence here might have some pretty large implications for our testing for our shows in the future. Yeah, because we're kind of on the fence about Jasher as it is, and so we're anxious to go test that for everyone to see in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What about in verse, and this is just a question I've got for you guys. I don't know that this contradicts or doesn't contradict Genesis, but in verse 8 and then going on into 9, where it says, "For they sought to do to Sarah and Rebekah as they had done to Dinah, our sister, but the Lord prevented them." So my question is, and this is just me thinking out loud, why did the Lord prevent it from being done to Sarah and Rebekah, but allow it to be done to Dinah?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
Well,
I guess
it might be his foreknowledge of something that he knew was going to take place. He was sparing Sarah and Rebekah from taking place. You know what I mean? So it's like, well, let's act now so that doesn't happen. And because this is a very unrighteous, unlawful thing that they're doing here, let's do it. Let's get rid of them.
Yeah.
It could also be simply that Dinah, and this is just like you're asking, this is not an official answer from Scripture. This is just me kind of conjecturing. But Sarah and Rebekah were wives and grandmother and wife, right? At this point, which I think is interesting because we're talking about Jacob's sons. So Rebekah is the mother of Jacob. Sarah is the grandmother of Jacob, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Correct.
They're already married to Isaac and Abraham, and this alludes to, at this point in the chronology, that Abraham is still alive. So this means they would be attacking those clans as well to make that happen. And so this means they're extending their reach beyond where Jacob was settling to go down to, was it Hebron, where Abraham was and Isaac was living at the time?
Yeah.
Which means a whole different ball of wax, in my opinion, because you're not just taking a 12-year-old girl that could have been, like Deuteronomy 22 talks about, out in the field one day and got caught by a stranger and was taken by force. You see what I'm saying? You're dealing with a woman that's a mother and a grandmother entrenched in their own, livelihood, their own household, and their own husbands as their protectors, meaning they're going to have to kill Isaac and Abraham too. So this is a big deal. Like, this was just a thought. Like, if that was where they were truly trying to go with this in the future, then you're digging into much bigger beads of wax than just a 12-year-old girl getting caught by herself.
Sure.
It's a great question, Matthew. I mean, it's
Yeah,
and good response, Sean.
Yeah, it's good. That was good, Sean. I appreciate that. It reminded me when Sean was reading it, when it says, "But the Lord prevented them," it reminded me of Genesis 20 with Abimelech, when Abimelech takes Sarah, and because Abraham says she's my sister. But in verse 6, let's see, Genesis 20, verse 3. But the Almighty came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "You are about to die because of the woman you have taken, for she is a married woman." Now Abimelech had not approached her, so he said, "Lord, Master, what would you destroy a nation even though it is innocent? Didn't he himself say to me, 'She is my sister'?" And she herself said, "He is my brother. I did this with a clear conscience and in clean hands." So Abimelech, he's like, "Man, I didn't know she was married." So he had some kind of fear of Yahweh or moral compass. Verse 6, then the Almighty said to him in the dream, "Yes, I know that you did this with a clear conscience. I have also kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I have not let you touch her." So that's what my mind went to when I said, "But the Lord prevented them from doing it to Sarah and Rebekah," was Abimelech, where Yahweh said, "Look, I've kept you from sinning against me. I didn't let you touch her. Just give her back and everything will be okay."
Yeah, great connection, brother. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what this reminds me of, guys? And this is just for playful conversation here, but it reminds me of the story of Troy, right? With the whole concept of, the prince of Troy taking the girl. And then
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
the other kings forming a coalition to come get her back, and they start a war. And so just interesting thought there, how they viewed their daughters and which ones decided to view them with importance and which ones didn't, and which one used them to marry for making alliances and which ones wanted to keep them kind of in their own clan, so to speak, their own tribe. So yeah, I just think if the men of Shechem had any clue of who Abraham was, they wouldn't have had that intention, because apparently they hadn't read Genesis 14 at that point.
Yeah.
So it's like,
He's a mighty warrior.
yeah, he's got his
good
own
point.
personal army.
Wow.
He's got 300
Wow.
people in his household at that point, which I think was before, probably way before Jacob was even born. So that could be, he knows how many people were in his household flourishing and a part of his extension of authority by the time the men of Shechem were having this idea in their head. So this could have been.
Yeah. Speaking of Abraham's. Oh, sorry, Matthew, go ahead.
I was just going to say, these were peaceful men. I mean, these were humble, peaceful men. But man, if you messed with some of their family or did something like that, watch out. I mean, they were warrior guys too. They weren't effeminate, maybe as the King James calls it. They were very masculine men. They could take control really quick if you messed up.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say, Sean, pertaining to Abraham's household, what about this this guy that was shamefully handled by them, named Eblayan? I wonder. There's probably an extra biblical text that talks about that. I feel like it's out there.
I'm sorry, Ken. Did you say Abraham's household, or are we referring to the men of Shechem's household?
Abraham. You're talking about in Abraham's household, he had around 300 people, right?
Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. So you're talking about in verse 9. It says they persecuted our father when he was a stranger and vexed his flocks when they were big with young, and Eblam, who was born in his house, they most shamefully handled. Okay, yeah. So we don't actually get that in Genesis.
No, we don't. I just it's just an interesting little thing. I wonder if it's expounded upon in a different text somewhere about this Eblayan who was in Abraham's house that the men of Shechem shamefully handled. But
or is this the stuff that they were having the disagreements over the wells in Abraham's day?
No, could be.
Was that in? Let me see. Is that in Genesis 24? Because remember, didn't Isaac have the same disagreement with the same people over the same wells?
Yeah.
So I have to figure out, maybe that was in Genesis 21. I have to go back and test my Genesis knowledge here. I just, unfortunately, I got so many tabs open, my computer just runs so slow. I can't even pull up verses, man. It's crazy.
Isn't it something? And I know you guys read a lot. I read a ton, especially the Torah, over and over and over and over and over. And still we have these conversations, and when you're talking, I'm thinking, where's that at? Where's that at? How much more do we have to read? We need to read more. But I guess it just comes with age. The older we get, the more we will have read the Torah, and we'll be able to just pop these verses off a lot better.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I can't wait till the day when it's written on our hearts, literally, so then I don't have
Amen.
to try to memorize anything. I'm terrible at that. I'm not the Sean encyclopedia.
Well, even, there's places in the scriptures I still can't just immediately go to.
Hey, don't cut yourself short, Ken. I was listening to you guys talk. I think it was y'all were getting interviewed by some lady about the Book of Enoch. And there was like a string of like 2 minutes, and Kim was saying like, yeah, Enoch 78 verse 32 and Enoch this. I was like, dude, how do you know all this? That was awesome, but that's people say that, if I'm talking, about a particular book I'm really familiar with, and I can just, rattle them off. And you were doing that with Enoch, and I was like, golly, wow, I feel diminished.
Yeah, but the thing is, ask me for where those references are right now, and I probably won't be able to tell you.
Yeah. Look, brothers, I'm gonna have to hang up here. So y'all can keep on going or whatever you have to do. But I've got to get to my grandson. I greatly appreciate the hospitality and the opportunity to do this.
Awesome. Well, we have 12 more chapters, brother, to finish this book out. So
I'll come on. I'll make my own video. Any mistakes y'all make on the rest of the chapters, I'll do my own video.
Yes, there you go. And gentlemen, I tell you what, this book is so extensive. There's so many fun things to look at, parallels to test, that I think this is going to take us longer than we have today to get through the rest of this book. So again, I do want to thank Matthew Janzen from Ministers of the New Covenant for joining us today and testing this book of the Testimony of Levi. If you guys haven't already went to Matthew's YouTube channel, I encourage you to do that now. Make sure you subscribe, and also check out his information, his teachings. He's a great brother. He has a lot of wisdom. And so now Ken and I don't agree on everything, and Matthew and I don't agree on everything, but that's just okay. That's part of the fellowship of our brotherhood, being able to walk and learn these things that the Father's put down for us to learn, and we're all teaching each other things along the way. And so, you may see some things on Matthew's channel that you don't see specifically on my channels, because my channel has a different focus. So, but Matthew is still a great blessing. And if you guys haven't already checked him out, go check him out on YouTube. It's called Ministers of the New Covenant. And as always, Ken, if you want to tell people about your channel.
Yes. So for those who aren't familiar with who I am, hopefully by now, since I'm associated with Sean and have been for the last little while, I have a YouTube channel also called Hanging on His Words. And I have a Facebook group as well. You can find me there, YouTube, and yes, a Twitter as well. And yeah, the channel's growing. It's definitely getting some good reviews, and I just feel like the Father has been a huge blessing and been very faithful to allow me the time to actually make videos and to do it in a way that I hope and pray that is unique and engaging and just excites people for the gospel of the kingdom of God. And so, yeah, that's me. So check me out if you want to.
Awesome, Ken. Thanks again for being here. Matthew, before we sign off, any concluding remarks?
I love both of you guys. I appreciate your spirit. You exhibit the fruits of the Spirit. I'm very thankful for that. I'm humbled that I was asked to come on here and talk about this book. I'm more than willing to come back for any of these extra biblical books. I'd love to discuss them and go through and decipher. We appreciate everybody for watching. And I would just say that if you're being benefited by these videos, and Sean didn't ask me to say this, but if you're getting benefit, then make sure to support Brother Sean in what he's doing, because this kind of stuff is not easy. I have done a lot of recordings, video, audio. I've written a lot of material and books, and it takes a lot of time, and a laborer is worthy of his hire. So if you're benefiting from these, hey, bless the brother so that he can continue to do this and maybe even do it, have more time to do it, and continue to put out this good material. So these are both good brothers. And like Sean said, we may not agree on everything, but we do agree on the essentials, and that's what makes us brothers. So thank you, brother, both of you.
Yeah. Amen.
Amen. Thanks for the kind words, Matthew. But guys,
Yes,
thank you for joining us again for this episode of Honor of Kings. We've been testing the testimony of 12 patriarchs, specifically the Book of Levi, and I think this has been a really fun episode, guys. You're a blessing to be doing this with, and we want to invite everyone that's watching back here next week for our continuation here on Honor of Kings. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.